We learned last week that Deuteronomy is a book that's defined by its very name. Deuta, which means second, and Namos, which means the law. And so the second law, or if you would, the second giving of the law. The law was first given to the people of Israel 40 years previously there at Mount Sinai. But now the whole generation had passed away. A new generation has been raised up, and are being made ready to go into the promised land. And so Moses is reminding them of what God had already given to them and to the congregation 40 years prior. But now it's a new group. It's a new generation. And so the law is going to be given a second time. And really that's for privilege and responsibility as well. But time goes by quickly. New generations come up, both in our flesh and blood families and in our church family as well. New believers and all, people that need to be reminded of what they're all about. And so one of the responsibilities, and really it's more than a responsibility, it's a privilege, is to continue to remind each generation, each new child or grandchild, each new group that the Lord brings into our family here at Concord, Calvary, to remind them about what God has said over and over and over and over again. They need to be reminded. It's like that character in Sesame Street, Forgetful Bill. What time is it, Bill? I forgot. It's kind of one of those things that's so easy for us. And we learned that the primary purpose of teaching, as C.S. Lewis has told us, is not so much to reveal, but rather to remind, to cause repetition, and because repetition is the mother of all learning. And so here in Deuteronomy, there's not a whole lot of new material. There are some things, but essentially it's a reiteration, a repeating, and a reminding. It's the second giving of the law. So the section we're looking at tonight, the main theme, is that there's to be kindness, compassion, and leniency. And you'll see some other things in here that are pretty cool. And so beginning in verse 1 of chapter 25, if there's a dispute between men, and they come to court, and you'll find some interesting things in here, guys. Not that you'd expect, but if you read ahead, you know what I'm talking about. But, the questions that are asked and the miscellaneous questions. So they have subgroups of what is going to take precedent. And then they have a whole section full of miscellaneous questions that keep coming up. And so if there's a dispute between men and they come to court, that the judges may judge them and they justify the righteous and condemn the wicked, then it shall be, if the wicked man deserves to be beaten, that the judge will cause him to lie down and be beaten in his presence, according to his guilt, with a certain number of blows, 40 blows he may give him and no more, lest he should exceed this and beat him with many blows above these, and your brother be humiliated in your sight. And so a man who is found to be guilty of a minor crime is to be beaten, and beaten publicly. And this is what the Word of God declares. Now we might look at that and go, that's terrible. But you know what? Our penal system doesn't work. We have millions of men and women in prison. And we're adding prisons all the time. And it's not working. In fact, it costs more to keep a man in prison than it does to send a man to Harvard or Yale for 1 year. And you look at this thing and you realize that there's just something wrong with our system. God in His law never has any words about prisons. There's no penal system involved. When a man is caught doing capital offenses, as we've seen before, what happens? Well, he's stoned right away by the community. And once he's found guilty, right then, excuse me, right then it's a minor infraction. He's to be beaten for the minor infractions. Right there in front of the community. Why? Why is it so important to have him in front of the community? This is what happens. People will learn. They'll learn very quickly. When you see somebody else being beaten, if you're a parent, you know how that works. When one of your kids gets a spanking, the other kids become angels. It's phenomenal. It's amazing. Daddy, can I get you anything? Daddy, would you like a Twinkie? Daddy. And the whole attitude in the house changes. The kids are fighting like cats and dogs. Okay, son, come here. And you apply the Board of Education to the seat of learning. And you do what needs to be done. And I'm not talking about beating your kids. That's not what we're talking about. But rather ministering to them in the way that the Word tells us to minister to them. For when that happens, that child is broken. And then at that point, you can give them a big hug. You can embrace them right then. And it doesn't go on for day after year, after a decade or whatever in some prison cell. That person is broken, and restoration starts right then. Plus the other kids, man, it's amazing what happens in a home when there's a spanking. And God knows that. And He says, I want this person beaten. And so now, be careful. Because it's not to be any more than 40 stripes under any condition. Now, Paul said in 2 Corinthians that he was beaten 5 times with 40 stripes, save one. You say, well, what's that mean? Well, what would happen is that the Jews would say, we don't want to make a mistake and give 41 accidentally. And so we'll limit ourselves to 39, lest we lose count. And so 39 is the number of mercy. 40 is the number of judgment. And so 40 lashes, God says, can be given, but they gave only 39. So Paul said, I received that 5 times, shipwrecked and imprisoned. Verse 4, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. If an ox is working away, grinding at the mill, treading out the corn, you're to let him eat what he treads out. I always wanted to work at Froster Freeze when I was younger and when I was growing up, because at that time you got to eat as much as you wanted if you worked there. As long as you were on your shift. You couldn't go in there and bum off when you weren't on your shift. But it was a great job. And so God is saying pretty much here the same thing. Let the ox eat. Not that they called me an ox, but I was close to being big ass. But saying pretty much that same thing. Let him eat off the floor. Now, Paul uses this same verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 9, to say, therefore, those that are feeding the flock have the opportunity or the right also to be fed, to be, in other words, taken care of in the process. And so in verses 5 and 6, he shifts gears a little, and he goes on to talking about the duty of a surviving brother. So verse 5 says, if the brothers dwell together, and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside the family, but rather her husband's brother shall go into her, take her as his wife, and perform the duty of a husband, and a husband's brother, I should say, to her. And it shall be that the firstborn son which she bears will succeed to the name of his dead brother, and that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. And so if I were to die, and I'm married to Dot, which I am, and we hadn't had children, which we have, if I die and my brother is still kicking around, it would be his responsibility to take my wife and to have a child with her as husband and wife. But that child that they have, the firstborn, is going to be my son legally, so that my name continues on. So I don't just fade away into oblivion. He would be named after me, so Joe Pratchard. And so that's the brother's responsibility. And God said that's brotherly responsibility. People say, well, am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you are. And you're to make sure that his name goes on and that he's going forth even though he might physically be dead. Now, what this would do is kind of interesting, because when an older brother would come home and tell the family, I'm getting married. I doubt that that's the way they did it. They didn't. You ever see the matchmaker? No. But the younger brothers would be really interested in the older brother's activities, because he would want to know precisely who this woman is. And they would want to have a say in this brother's choice, because they realized and recognized that they might end up with her one day. And so he would be very interested to see what the older brother's choice was. Now, verse 7 says, but if a man does not want to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to raise up a name to his brother in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. I can't take her. I can't stand her, the younger brother might say. Then let this brother's wife, the one who is now a widow, let them go. Not committed, not indentured or anything like that. Then verse 8, the elders of the city shall call him and speak to this just young man or this older man, this older brother. But if he stands firm and says, I don't want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders. Remove his sandal from his foot. Okay? Spit in his face. And answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel. Hey, there goes the house of him who had his sandal removed. You think Indian names are long? This is a long name. That's the guy, and that's his house, who had his sandal removed. You say, Joe, what's this all about? Well, if a guy is not going to care about his brother, or is not going to do what he's supposed to do, like so many of us do what we're supposed to do. I just don't want to. I just don't have a desire to. Then the widow is to go and take off his shoe, spit in his face, and imply in so doing, brother, you're a heel. And honestly, that's the idea there. You are one who has your shoe loosed. You don't have any sole. You're a heel. It's kind of like a shoe and tell in the whole community. Come on, I'll keep going. No. But this guy's not willing to do what he's supposed to do. He's stuck on himself. He's really stuck on himself, and he's concerned about himself. And so he won't fulfill his responsibility to his brother. So I spit on your face and take your shoe. Spit you in the face. That reminds me of a story. During World War II, a military unit in the Pacific hired a local boy and a cook to clean for him. Being a bunch of jokers they were, they quickly took advantage of the boy's seeming naivety. And so they smeared Vaseline on the stove handles so he would get it all over his hands. They put buckets of waters up over the door so he'd get soaked if he opened it. They even nailed his shoes to the ground during the night. Day after day, the young boy took the brunt of their practical jokes without saying a word. Finally, the men felt guilty about what they were doing. And so they went with him and they said, "Look, we know these pranks aren't funny for you, and we wanted to say we're sorry. We're never going to take advantage of you again." Well, the boy smiled and then he asked, "So no more sticky on the stove?" The guys responded, "Nope." "No more water on the door?" They answered, "No. No more water on the door." "No more nail shoes to the floor?" "No, we'll stop that too." "Okay," the boy said with a wide grin. "Then no more spitty and soup." Now, this comes into play while in the book of Ruth. You can read the story and you can see how a man was supposed to assume Ruth as his wife, but chose not to do so. And so this would apply to him if you know the story. If not, read it. It's a great story. But notice this, what's being talked about in the previous section, 40 stripes. Or here, spit in the face, and then his shoe taken. You see, they both point to and speak of Jesus Christ, like so many other stories we find in the Old Testament. For by his stripes we are healed. He was beaten in our place. You see, he took the beating for us. Just like a man was to be beaten so that the community might be healthy, Jesus was beaten that we might be made whole. And so by his stripes, we're healed. We're made whole. He was beaten that we might be healthy. And Jesus was the one who they spat in his face. And they took off his shoes and his clothes. And they drove a spike through his heels. You see, Jesus, he did no wrong, but he was beaten. He didn't refuse to take the wife. He takes you and me, the bride of Christ, and it's simply amazing that Jesus himself, who in his perfection was beaten, spat on. His shoes were taken off forcibly, and a spike was driven through his heels, agonizingly. But all of that is to say this. He did that because it should have been you that was beaten. And it should have been me that was spit on. It should have been us. But he took our place. Because we haven't been our brother's keeper. We haven't honored the name of our brother in the way that we ought to. And we have done things wrong that perhaps have not been discovered. We know that we ought to be beaten. We know that, I think. You know that. But he did that for me. And he took the place of you, too. And I'm thankful for that. Jesus, the one who absorbed it all. He who knew no sin was made sin. Cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. He did that for you and for me. Well, next, one of these 12th tough verses, miscellaneous laws. And you'll know what I mean when I say it, but if two men fight together and the wife of one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of the one attacking him, and puts out her hand and seizes him by the genitals, then you shall cut off her hand, and your eyes shall not pity her. What? You look at some of this stuff and you're just like, what's the point? And he says here, these two guys are fighting. And the wife says, I'm not going to sit here and allow my husband to get beat up in that way. My husband doesn't deserve it. And so she intervenes. And women, wives, don't play fair necessarily. They'll do whatever it takes. Why? Because of the love that they have for their husbands. And that's a good thing. My husband's right. You know, your husband comes home and tells you about something at work, and you listen to him, and you can't believe it. And you've got some things that you want to say about that boss or that coworker that's causing problems. You heard his story and you believe it. But that is the problem. I don't say that harshly, but I say it firmly. You haven't heard the whole story. That's just one side. And your husband's not necessarily lying. We're not saying that. But the Bible says that we all see through a glass darkly, right? And we see things from our vantage point. All of us do from time to time. The problem is that you don't have the opportunity to hear the other side of the story. Now the problem is, men, we have more of a tendency to duke things out. You know, if you're on the field at junior high or high school and you got that guy that's acting like the bully, you finally come to a point where you go blow by blow. And you have those differences and you punch each other a bit. And then it's pretty much forgotten about. Guys, women don't do that. They keep secrets. They won't let go. And they have a way of being tenacious too. A man, when they're hurt because they're taking the hurt of their husband or the wife, they get in there and there's an anger. And guys, we end up forgetting about our differences after a week or two or whatever. Not so with women. And it happens here. I've seen it. I honestly have. It was kind of one of those things where one party didn't like what she thought was eyes that another woman was having for her husband. And it was years and years and years and years ago. So you wouldn't, I don't think, know anybody that was involved. But it happens. You know, and it can happen in church too. You know, they just get to a point where they can't believe it. Or they say, how could they do that? Or maybe it's a broken promise. You know, or whatever. The two guys will be at odds for a shorter time. And she looks at it and goes, well, he took advantage of you. And so to the other wife, well, like I said, guys eventually work it out. But the women sit in the sanctuary on opposite sides. And the hostility remains. The husbands have forgotten about it, but not the wives. It's one of the glories of being a woman. Now, women do amazing things when it comes to family. A desperate Argentinian, a mother whose car was being stolen with her 7-year-old son inside of it. The article that was written says she threw herself in front of the car and then grabbed the exhaust pipe when the car ran over her. I could just picture this, hanging on for dear life. But Monica Junco, 36, was then dragged along beneath the car for nearly a mile until the thief slowed for a pothole. A passerby saw her being dragged, stopped the car, pulled him out, and called the police. The hospital official says she suffered burns from the exhaust pipe and bruises, but is recovering well. Can you imagine? But that's perfect. That's perfect. A mother sees her car being stolen with a 7-year-old, and she throws herself in front of the car. You guys remember the movie Courageous? About the cops? It was a Kendrick's movie. And the thing started, you remember how it started? He went up, pulled into a gas station, and he had his little baby in the back seat. And there was a guy there that came out of nowhere and jumped in the car and stole it. And this guy wouldn't have anything to do with that, but he ran and chased him, and it was a pretty intense scene. But here, a mother sees her car being stolen, and it's like, are you crazy? She throws herself in front of the car. Because why? Because that's what women do. You don't want to mess with a woman who's with a mission. You really don't. Because they'll do whatever it takes for the family. And the car runs over her. She grabs the exhaust pipe, hangs on for a mile, getting burned and bruised. But man, her family, her baby's inside. And that's the glory of a woman caring about her husband, son, or daughter. But wife, listen though. You're only hearing half the story of what happened between your husband and that other woman's husband. And at best, so, as you look at this, you're wise if you don't want to get caught up unnecessarily and end up with a chopped off hand. To say, you know what? I love you, honey, and I'm going to pray for you, and I'm not going to go to war on your behalf or put my hand in the matter and try to punish that guy that treated you, my little sweetie pie, so meanly, in such a mean manner. Don't get your hand cut off unnecessarily, but rather know there's more to the story than you'll ever know. And tell her that you love her anyways. So you're just going to stand with your wife. But you're not going to do what the Word warns you not to do, and that is fight dirty, have grudges. God says, women, if you do that, when two men are fighting and the wife tries to rescue her husband and fights dirty, she is going to get cut up in the process. She's going to be the biggest loser of all. And that's important. So you don't go there lest you get caught up and cut up and lose your hand. Then again in verse 12, then you shall cut off her hand. Your eyes shall not pity her. You shall not have in your bag differing weights. So he's shifting gears again, this miscellaneous stuff. You're not to have a heavy one and a light one. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall not, or you shall have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure, that your days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. For all who do such things, all who behave unrighteously, are an abomination to the Lord your God. And so basically he's saying, don't keep two sets of books of weights, where you have one set when you're selling and another set when you're buying. Two standards. Don't go to the car lot and say, that's a piece of junk. I'm not going to pay that much for that car. And you talk the guy down, you whittle him down to a ridiculously low price. And then you go and you brag to your buddies, can you believe this great car I just got? What God's saying here, guys, is He hates that. No two sets of standards. Don't be wishy-washy just in order to make a buck. But be kind. Be generous. Be fair. Pay what it's worth. Don't try to weigh the scales in your advantage or to your favor. Because if you do, it won't go well with you. Oh, you might be rich financially. You might make a lot of money. But it's not going to be going well with you personally. God says, I want you to be a people that are kind and honest and full of integrity. That's a mouthful. I want you to be people that are kind, not trying to get back at others and take revenge or do anything like that. But be honest. Be full of integrity. That works so much better for us when we walk in obedience, surrender to the Lord. Then we're going to finish here in the chapter with the story of the Amalekites, but we're not going to get all the way through it because I want this to sink in a little bit for you guys. But beginning in verse 17, he says, remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt. Verse 18, how he met you on the way and attacked your rear ranks. All the strangers at your rear, or the stragglers, at your rear, when you were tired and you were weary. And he did not fear God. Therefore, it shall be when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies all around in the land which the Lord your God has given you to possess as an inheritance, that you will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget. Like I said, we'll talk about this some more next week, but I want to introduce it. What happens to those that are in the back of the pack? What happens to those that get attacked? They're not at the tip of the spear, but they're at the back with the stragglers. And note again verse 17. He uses that word that he uses so often in this chapter. Remember what Amalek did to you. Remember, so here he's telling them to remember this. Not necessarily that he wants them to go get revenge, as I said. But what is it? Fool me once and fool me twice. Fool me twice. Shame on you. And so Moses says, remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you came out of Egypt. How he met thee on the way and smote the hindmost of thee. All that were feeble behind thee when thou wast faint and weary. And he feared not God. And so notice again, Moses starts in verse 17 with the word remember. And he's reminding them. And then he ends it in verse 19, the last phrase. Don't forget this. Remember, reminded, don't forget. Remember and don't forget. Repeat. Remember, don't forget. Don't forget what? How when you, he says to the congregation of Israel that day, how when you left Egypt and you made your way to the land of promise, remember how Amalek, that is the descendants of Amalek, are the Amalekites, how they came out and they attacked you while you were on the way. You were minding your own business, going down the road. You were packed. You had a lot of burden. You had a lot of goods and family possessions that you were taking to the promised land. And he says, remember and don't forget that when you made your way out and you left Egypt and you're on your way to that land of promise, don't you forget how Amalek, that is the descendants of Amalek, the Amalekites, don't you dare forget how they came out and they attacked you while you were still on the way. You were still traveling. There were certain things that you honored with the other tribes and the other groups of people. Now the Amalekites were the descendants of Esau. And the Amalekites were perpetual enemies of the Israelites. And the Amalekites didn't fight fair. They were cheaters. They were cheaters, guys like the Kansas City Chiefs, you know. They were perpetual enemies, though, of the Israelites. And the Amalekites did not fight fair. They played dirty. That is, Moses says, remember what they did to you. What did they do? They attacked you and smote the hindmost of you. Not hermano, not man to man, not face to face, but rather they used guerrilla tactics. Waiting till you passed by, they'd hide. They'd get down, they'd burrow down in the ground or underneath rocks or behind rocks. And they would hide as best as they could. And they would wait until all the group, the family, would pass them by. 12 times over. They had that opportunity. They were getting pretty good at it. But it wasn't man to man. It wasn't face to face. It was like these guerrilla tactics, waiting till you passed. And then they would come out from behind the rocks and they would ambush those who were at the back of the pack, who, by the way, were weak, feeble, and weary. It was the weak and the feeble and the weary. Those were the ones they attacked. Those were the ones they picked off like guerrilla soldiers. And so Moses says to them again, remember that fact. Don't you forget it. And when you get to the promised land and you settle there, then take on the Amalekites and blot out their name from even the remembrance of this nation, of this land, and of this region. Make them disappear. Can you imagine? Blot out their name from the remembrance. The Amalekites, who's that? They're gone. And it's interesting because you see Amalek represents what, and I should introduce this. There are many places in the Bible where, in the Old Testament especially, where you will be given a story, and they're cool stories, but they're even more cool because they carry a deeper meaning. They carry a type. And even more impressive because the type generally always has an awesome lesson for us to learn and for us to grow by. And so this is an example of one of those. is you take on the Amalekites and blot their name out from even the remembrance of this nation, of this land, of this region. And the interesting part is that Amalekites and Amalek represent what you and I go through presently. What do you mean, Joe? Well, that is, we have an adversary, don't we? We have an adversary. And Peter said, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, your enemy, Satan, goes about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And it's just like A.W. Tozer said, that classical, crusty preacher from the last generation, when he said, life is not a playground, it's a battleground. Life is not a playground, it's a battleground. And it's true. There are battles all around you and me. In fact, it's a jungle out there. Really. It's a jungle. And in that jungle, we have an adversary. It's the roaring lion. And it's said that in the jungle, the lion wakes up every day and knows that he has to simply run faster than the slowest prey. Prey. Let's say there's gazelles out there in the field. So the lion wakes up and he says, what I need to do is run faster than the slowest gazelle. This makes sense, right? If I do that, I'll have the gazelle for lunch or dinner. Now the gazelle wakes up and he knows that he too has a task for the day. He has to run faster than the fastest lion, faster than the slowest gazelle, faster than the fastest lion. Otherwise, he's going to be lunch or dinner himself. Either way, lion or gazelle, you have to wake up and you have to start your day doing what? Running. You guys don't get that, you're going to get eaten in this world. You're going to be lunch or dinner. Either way, lion or gazelle, you have to wake up and start your day running. Or you'll starve if you're a lion, or be dinner if you're a gazelle. It's a jungle, and you just got to keep moving. Now, in reality, the Bible teaches you and I the same thing. It's a jungle out there. And there is a roaring lion that wants to not pray, P-R-A-Y, for you, but pray, P-R-E-Y, upon you. He has a plan, and here's his plan. Remember this and don't forget it. He's an Amalekite. That is, the enemy always attacks at the back of the pack. And that's what he does. He doesn't play fair. He fights dirty, and he attacks those that are at the back of the pack. Those that are weary, those that are feeble. That's the plan. That's the strategy of this enemy that we face on a daily basis. And Moses says, remember, don't forget this. Don't forget what Amalek did. He attacked the back of the pack. Guys, this is a word that I need to remember. This is a word that you need to remember. And that we need to be reminded of constantly, because we forget. Because you see, we can grow really weary. We can say, you know what, I've been walking with the Lord for a lot of years. I've been involved in the war for a lot of years. And quite frankly, I'm a little bit pooped. I'm a little fatigued. I'm a little weary. I need a break today. I need to kick back a bit. I need to cruise for a while. Watch out. Watch out. Be careful. Because you see, when you think that you need to take a break, when you begin to think that you deserve a break, get ready. When you think, I deserve that Big Mac, get ready for a brutal attack. I know that we can say from time to time, I deserve a break. I've been in the war, in the battles, but hey, Remember that when you kick back, when you begin to relax, when you just tilt your head up on a soft rock, that's the time that you're going to really get into trouble and be in trouble. The worst place to be is in the back of the pack. The safest place to be is in the front and center. Fully involved, totally engaged. That's the safest place that you can be spiritually. When you take some R&R and cruise, that's when Amalek attacks the back of the pack, because he knows that's when you are the most vulnerable, most susceptible. And I want to end right there, because the next section, I have some more of this I want to share with you. Just to encourage you guys. The thief comes like in the night to rob and kill and steal and destroy. But he says, I come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. And he wants to give you that abundant life. He loves you. He wants to give you a sure foundation. He wants you to be built up.